all I could see was they were putting that child in a situation where he was going to be killed.
She heard a noise, a gasping noise, as if something had struck Eli, and then she heard him fall.
His abdomen was incredibly distended and rock hard. He was dead on arrival.
How could anyone let this happen? How could CPS let this happen? As far as I'm concerned, they're the ones that done it. They wouldn't listen to the doctors, and they wouldn't listen to me.
As the evidence accumulated in the case, it should have been cause to more seriously question a case plan which allowed the child to stay in the home.
The right to family, the right to be a parent, that is a fundamental right that cannot be impaired or limited or interfered with by the state unless there's some compelling reason to do so.
It's very difficult to remove children from the custody of their parents, even when that's needed. But we can't have it both ways. We cannot remain outside of the family and prevent children from being hurt in the way that this boy was. We can't have it both ways.
Everett, Washington, located 30 miles north of Seattle on the edge of Puget Sound, population 60,000. Everett began as a mill town, built to process timber from the mountains of western Washington. But lately, timber has been on the decline. Several mills have closed altogether. No job is guaranteed, and layoffs have been a fact of life. The future seemed to be in aerospace and electronics. For the young, Everett is a city in transition, and the outlook often seems anything but certain. 2 blocks from downtown, there is a small house facing a busy street. Paint is peeling from the doorway, and a window is boarded over. The house was rented to Mary and Darren Creekmore, and it was here that their son Eli would die. It began on the night of September 26th, just after midnight. Providence Hospital received the emergency call. A paramedic ambulance was on its way.
They were bringing me a 3-year-old white male who was in full cardiac arrest. They'd be in the emergency room within 5 minutes. He had no spontaneous respirations, he had no spontaneous movement, he didn't respond to any stimulation of any kind. His abdomen was incredibly distended and rock hard. And at one point during the resuscitation, a needle was placed into the abdominal cavity, and there was an amazing rush of foul-smelling air. Actually caused everybody to gag. And it was at that point that I knew he must have had a ruptured bowel. Then sometime during the resuscitation, there were rumors that Eli had been taken away by his parents on 2 prior occasions for documented child abuse. And it was at that point that you could just kind of feel the tension in the room. It was an overwhelming experience. There was never any point during the resuscitation where we got his cardiac activity going. He was dead on arrival.
The next day, Everett police went to the home of Mary and Darren Creekmore. Darren was arrested and accused of kicking his son in the abdomen, rupturing his intestine, and causing his death. The city would first learn of what happened in the Monday morning edition of the Everett Herald. A brief article described what little was known about the case. Soon after, the paper received 2 disturbing phone calls. The first was from Dr. Peter Milliken. He had treated Eli in the emergency room on 2 occasions prior to his death for suspected child abuse. He had reported this to Child Protective Services, assuming the state agency would protect the boy.
I was really
really upset to find out that in spite of all our efforts, it had come to such a bad end.
Yeah, sitting down in the old easy chair, opened the paper, and there, right in front of me, Eli's dead. Well, it was a short little paragraph, and I figured, wait a minute, there's more to this than what they're reporting. So I called the Everett Herald that night.
The second call came from Ken and Joanne Lechner. They operate a home daycare center and had taken care of Eli in the 8 months prior to his death. They had many times reported to Child Protective Services that Eli was being abused.
Just about all the times that I had called, that either the calls weren't returned or that the parents had already called and she agreed with what they had said.
The Herald decided to further investigate the story.
Yes, well, I've left a message for her on Friday, but I wanted to get an update on how she's doing. This is Suki Dardarian.
Reporter Suki Dardarian was assigned to interview Mary Creekmore, Eli's mother. Mary agreed to meet at the Creekmore house. This would turn out to be the only time Eli's mother would speak publicly about the death of her son. She gave Dardarian a first-hand account of the night Eli died.
She sat Eli down to eat dinner, and Darren then sat down at the table too, and Eli began to cry because he was afraid of Darren, and Darren didn't like the fact that Eli was crying, she said, and started telling him not to cry. He continued to cry, and so he sent him to his room, where he continued to cry, and then Darren went into the room. And she heard a noise, a gasping noise, as if something had struck Eli, and then she heard him fall. And then Darren came out of the room, and she asked him what he'd done, and she said that he responded saying, "Nothing, I didn't do anything." A little bit after that, she said Eli came out of the room and told his dad that he'd pooped his pants, and his dad asked him why, and he said, "Because you kicked me in my stomach." She intervened at that point and said, "Don't kick him," or something. And then he turned and threatened to kick her as well. Then he sent Eli into the bathroom to clean his pants, and while he was in there, Eli urinated, and he told his father what he'd done. Mary said that Darren then went into the bathroom with a belt and beat him, bringing welts to Eli's backside. And she went into the bathroom and found him in the toilet with his arms up, and he had thrown up on himself. And she pulled him up and cleaned him up, she said, and then put him to bed.
In severe pain, Eli would lie crying in his bedroom, but Mary Creekmore did nothing. Afraid of her husband, she too went to bed. She was awakened a few hours later by a family friend yelling that Eli had stopped breathing.
I think that bothered me more than the fact that he was dying, was that even when he'd had his fatal injury, there was a period of a number of hours where he could have been brought over here and we could have saved him. And we didn't even get that last chance.
Dardarian reported what Mary Creekmore had told her, and she quoted Dr. Milliken and the Lechners. The Creekmore case became a front-page story. New information appeared daily in papers across the state. A child had died at the hands of his parents. It happens more than 1,000 times each year across the country. But this death, more than any other in the state's history, would provoke public outrage and debate, for it raised fundamental questions about the family, the protection of children, and the responsibility of the state. It had all started more than 3 years before. Mary Creekmore was a high school junior when she decided to drop out of school to study computer programming. But she was also pregnant and decided to marry her boyfriend, Darren Creekmore. Always unemployed, he was rumored to be a heavy drinker and prone to violence. A month after the marriage, Darren was arrested and accused of assaulting 2 men outside a Wichita bar. 3 weeks after Eli was born, Darren was sent to prison. Mary continued to live with her mother and brothers. Eli was the center of attention. Several months later, the family decided to leave Kansas and head west. Mary's father lived near Everett, Washington, so the family headed there. Mary's parents were divorced, but still friends. With the family reunited in Washington, Eli became the favorite grandchild, surrounded by a large and loving family.
Mary and Eli and I, well, they were all family. And we were a very close family. I've never seen a more perfect mother all the time that Darren was gone. He was a very happy little boy, very smart. Just everything he'd done I was proud of. But I'd always had lots of children around me too, besides my own children, and enjoyed them all the time, but never so much as I enjoyed this grandchild.
But just after Eli's second birthday, Darren was released on parole. Within a month, he was drinking again and had begun abusing his son.
One of the times when I was talking to Mary on the phone, I could hear Eli crying in the background and Darren hollering. And I said, "What's wrong with Eli?" And Mary had told me that Darren was spanking him. And I asked her why. She said he'd thrown up all over the floor in the living room. And I said, "You stop him from that right now." I said, "That's an involuntary muscle. He can't help throwing up, no matter where it is." And she says, "Well, Mom, he's got to be corrected."
Mary's mother was angry, but uncertain about what to do. Then on December 16th, 4 months after Darren had returned, the situation became worse.
They had come over to the house because they wanted to borrow some tools. They'd come here to borrow some tools. I thought, fine, anything so I can see that baby. They could have anything they wanted. As long as I get to see him. But when they got here, Eli couldn't walk. And he appeared to have lost about 10 pounds. His eyes were sunken. He was bruised all over his face, up into his head. It looked like cigarette burns. And Eli was saying, "Grandma, can I stay with you?" In a real weak voice, and so on. And I just begged and pleaded with him to either leave him so I could take him to the doctor or they would. And they wouldn't do it. They went home with the child.
As soon as they had left, Eli's grandmother called Child Protective Services, the state agency responsible for protecting children from abuse. A police officer and a caseworker went to the Creekmore house. Eli was taken into protective custody and driven to Providence Hospital. He was treated by Dr. Peter Milliken.
He had a variety of bruises that had different ages. It suggested that he had had a lot of injuries over a period of time. And I thought that the injuries I saw were very suspicious for child abuse. Did what I was supposed to do, which is call a Child Protective Service, and thought everything would work out.
Based on Dr. Milliken's report, Eli was taken to a foster home. But Darren Creekmore denied abusing his son, and there were no witnesses. In what was to become a recurring pattern, CPS felt obligated to return the boy to his parents.
The right to family, the right to be a parent, that is a fundamental right that cannot be impaired or limited or interfered with by the state unless there's some compelling reason to do so. And that even if you are involved, that the interference has to be as minimal as possible, consistent with protecting the child. And the law recognizes that parents are not required to be perfect. Children are not entitled to be free from every harm, only serious harm. And parents, if they can meet the basic needs of their child, they're entitled to have their child back, even though they may be far less than perfect parents.
After Eli was returned to his parents, CPS referred the family to an intensive counseling program called Home Builders. A counselor visits the family daily for 4 weeks. The goal is to help the family resolve their problems in a way that allows them to remain together. The approach has been highly successful, but it also raises complex questions about how best to protect children from abuse.
Hi. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Well, the only thing I want you to do is when you find matches is bring them to me.
Okay. and you tell me that, Dad, I'm not supposed to play with matches, so here, okay? I want you to say, okay, Dad.
Okay, Dad.
All right.
Jim Howe is a single father who was also reported to Child Protective Services following an incident with his 6-year-old son, Sean.
When I started working a lot, I didn't have anybody to watch the boys, so I had to depend on them pretty much to watch themselves. And I was trying to keep the wood stove going, so I got to where I was letting James keep the fire going for me. Unfortunately, Sean decided that it was time for him to get involved in the fire too, so he put a couple of good burns in the carpet and whatnot. And the last thing was, I was getting ready to go to work one night, and I opened his door, and he was attempting to burn a paper bag in the corner of his room. And I just totally overreacted. I took my belt off and I used it on him. I left marks. So anyway, it was turned into Child Protective Services, and they sent home builders out.
Sean would be learning the appropriate responses for a variety of specific behaviors, and the most typical of those would be accepting no for an answer, following an instruction, in this case, giving matches to you. Following instruction could also be...
Karen Bream is a home builder's counselor. She's teaching Sean to follow directions, and she's teaching his father alternative methods of discipline. Instead of spanking Sean for what he does wrong, Jim has learned to reward the boy for what he does right. Sean's behavior is recorded on a chart on the living room wall. Good behavior earns a night out at McDonald's.
45 points equals a Happy Meal.
Okay.
All right.
Got ya.
Yeah. With him, it was just about a spanking every day. And I haven't had to spank him in 3 weeks. And that's great. That's great. Actually, it's become kind of a joy to come home now.
We believe it's important to work with a family together, even if a child has been hurt or has been neglected. If you think that there's a good chance that things are going to be resolved, because those are going to be the people who are going to be living together anyhow after the treatment is done.
But the home builder's approach also has its critics.
Putting people under the same roof and saying that therefore we have a family that's together is not necessarily true. I'm afraid that oftentimes when abuse is in a family, that the family isn't functioning, that people are being hurt, that it's not good for anyone.
Norm Nickel is a counselor who specializes in treating abusive men. These men have severely abused their children.
I can remember lots of times spanking and thinking, I'm not going to be able to hit her hard enough to get through what I'm trying to do, or shaking, grabbing by the collarbones just close enough that it could feel like a choke, and shaking really hard, and, I'd leave bruises.
You have to picture a 4-year-old kid, slapping her in the mouth, pulling her hair, shaking her, not just yelling at her, but screaming at her.
Sad. And now you think about it, and you get a butterfly feelings in your stomach of, how really violent I was.
Following criminal conviction, these men entered treatment as an alternative to going to jail. But as a condition for treatment, Nickel requires that each man separate himself from his family.
Abusers are extremely good at being able to slip through cracks, at being able to manipulate systems, at being able to lie. They're expert liars. So you need a highly confrontive, long-term, really tough group therapy kind of program to make these people take responsibility and put the responsibility back in their lives.
For years, I needed treatment, I needed help, and I never would go look for it.
Being out on my own, it was saying, you're the problem, you're the one who has to leave, you're the one who has to go get fixed. And that's when I finally started to deal with it.
I seriously doubt if going into somebody's office for counseling individual would have given me the skills that they have. In fact, I know it would have never happened. So the big plus with this is that they've brought us together as a family.
Family is by far the most dangerous institution that exists. The most likely place to be murdered in the United States will be in your bedroom. The second most likely place is in your kitchen. The most likely person to murder you in the United States is your spouse. the most likely place for a child to be murdered is in their home and by their parents. So these are extremely dangerous situations, and I think under the guise of trying to keep the family together and trying to believe in family, the sanctity of the family, oftentimes we ignore the potential for danger and destruction of the family. And I think we need to take that very, very seriously. This whole issue of abuse is extremely serious and dangerous.
Home builders saw the Creekmore family every day for 4 weeks. They refused to comment on the case, except to say that during that time, Eli was not abused. They recommended to CPS that the family remain together.
The law states that parents have a right to receive help to remedy their problems and to be given every reasonable chance to get their child back. The state is required to help the parents do that. And so if there's any change in circumstances, you have to look at that and make a determination as to whether there's been enough change that the child could now be protected in the home.
It seemed to CPS that the Creekmores had made progress and that Eli could remain with his parents. In addition, daycare would be provided at Ken and Joanne Lechner's. While Mary was at work, Eli would not be left alone with his father. But a month after the home builders' counseling had ended, the Lechners began noticing bruises.
Sometimes they were bad, sometimes they weren't, sometimes it was just a lot of them. Toward the end, they just got progressively worse. Just about all the times that I had called, that either the calls weren't returned or that the parents had already called and she agreed with what they had said.
And you kept calling?
Always.
How many times do you think you called her?
At least 15, if not more.
And we just didn't know.
We talked to our folks, we talked to friends, we talked to a lot of different people. Yeah, saying what else can you do? And nobody else seemed to know either. You know something is wrong, but nobody seems to be doing anything about it.
Then in early May, 5 months before Eli's death, Eli's grandmother took these snapshots. Eli was bruised around the testicles and on the back of the legs. For the first time, Darren admitted hitting his son with a ruler when the boy had wet his pants. Creekmore was charged with assault, and CPS requested he voluntarily move out of the house. Initially, he agreed, but within a few weeks, he had moved back in. Mary Creekmore failed to report this to CPS. Since Mary seemed unwilling to take sides against her husband, CPS relented. They decided not to seek a court order enforcing the separation.
When you use the alternative of excluding the offender, that also puts upon the remaining parent a very heavy policing function. It requires them to be responsible for keeping that person out, for taking steps to actively and vigorously protect the child, and for taking steps to report to the authorities and to the court if the abuser returns in violation of a court order. That's a heavy responsibility to bear, especially if you, as the non-offending parent, if you have emotional ties to that abuser.
Described as weak-willed and easily manipulated, Mary Creekmore seemed incapable of protecting her son. She consistently accepted her husband's apologies and denials. Hurt by her parents' divorce, she desperately wanted her own marriage to survive. But in siding with her husband, she became increasingly isolated, and eventually the abuse would be directed at her as well. She described one incident to Suki Dardarian.
Darren came home irate, apparently because she had visited a friend after work. He hit her on her back and on her head, went in and got Eli. They were both then in the living room, and he threw Eli down, and it started to get more heated and more heated and more heated, and he said at one point, "You want to call the police?" And he picked up the phone and threw it, and then began to throw other objects in the living room. She said she bolted from the house and ran across the street and where there's a transmission shop and asked for help, and the people over there said that they wouldn't get involved, and just then he grabbed her and managed to overpower her and get her back into the house. And when I asked her, why didn't you leave? Her response was, he would say everything would be nice again.
I had asked her about some bruises one time, and she says, I don't know. When I asked her what happened, how did she get those bruises? I don't know.
Increasingly worried, Eli's grandmother made a visit to CPS. When she arrived, the caseworker seemed openly hostile.
And she says, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I wanted to talk to you about Eli." And she says, "I don't want to hear anything." And the friend of mine says, "Well, we're going to come in and talk to you." She says, "Well, all right." In a disgusted tone and so on, and I told her about some more bruises that Eli had had and some more incidents, or tried to tell her, and she didn't want to hear any of it. And I said, "He's going to kill that baby." And there was nothing, just no response.
As things got worse, Eli's grandmother sought help from Artis Morrow, Eli's great aunt.
Myrna told me how many times she had called and gotten no help from the CPS office in Everett. As a matter of fact, they had accused her of harassing them. They told her to leave her alone. That, they didn't need her interference anymore. That they were watching out for Eli, just to let go. That they were doing their job. And of course, she would call me because she'd say, "I'm going to give up." And I'd say, "Oh, you can't give up. You're the only one that's speaking for that youngster."
But the grandmother's efforts would prove futile. Several months later, on Eli's third birthday, his great aunt, his grandmother, and a third relative arrived at the Creekmore house to find Eli severely beaten.
One side of his face was all black and blue, and there were big dark circles under his eyes, and his face was so badly bruised that the skin was taut and shiny. We did take a lot of pictures. That was a good excuse, being it was his birthday. They didn't object to that.
The three women convinced Mary and Darren to let them take Eli with them. Feeling helpless and uncertain what to do, they stopped at a coffee shop a few blocks away. They were waited on by Glenda Jensen.
His face was so swollen that his cheekbones looked like they were going to pop. The grandma told me to feel his head. He had millions, it seemed like, of lumps on his head, just one right after another. And he was trying to eat some ice cream, and he stuck the spoon in his mouth, and he said, "Ow, Grandma," and he pulled it out, and it was totally bloody. His whole inside of his mouth had been scraped and was just raw.
It was horrible. I kept thinking that CPS would do something about it before he got this far, but they wouldn't.
He didn't want to go home. He said, "No, Grandma, I love you and I want to stay with you." Because I'm sure he knew what would happen when he went back.
Glenda Jensen would later describe Eli's condition to police officers who had stopped in for coffee. They went to the Creekmore house and confirmed what she had told them. Eli was taken to the hospital. The doctor on duty was Peter Milliken, the same doctor who had treated Eli 7 months before.
This time, the injuries I saw concerned me because they looked like there was more dangerous kind of trauma being inflicted on him. There's a sign that's called a raccoon eyes, which is 2 bruises around both eyes, and that is a sign that there is a fracture on the base of the skull, and the nature of the bones there and the anatomy there is such that often you can't confirm that with an x-ray, but when you see those 2 bruises, the inference is that the blood is seeping forward from the base of the skull to around the eyes. When you see that, you think if anybody who's getting hit that hard is real close to having a life-threatening or disabling head injury. And the disposition was that he was to go to foster care. And then the police officer who was involved in the case also asked me to fill out a police report. And on that form I stated that if Eli returned to his home, that there was a significant chance that he would suffer a serious disabling injury or be killed.
But Dr. Milliken's warning went unheeded. Eli spent a few days in a foster home, but in a decision that would later seem hard to believe, the caseworker decided that if the Creekmores would submit to a psychological evaluation, Eli would once again be returned to his parents. The decision was approved by the CPS supervisor, but the psychological evaluation was never completed. 2 months later, Eli Creekmore was dead.
Mary's dad finally found out what had happened, and he called me up and told me that Darren killed Eli. And I just was hysterical. I just fell to pieces.
She told me that he died, and she wanted me to get over there right away.
I couldn't believe it, and I made the statement, and it was more out of sarcasm than anything to the girls here at work that, what do we have to do? Just stand around until we read about him in the paper? Then will they do something when he's dead? And almost exactly 2 months later, I picked up the Herald, and it was on the front page, and that's the way I found out he had died.
This one pierced everybody's tough hide and got to our hearts.
The image that I kept replaying through my mind again and again was of, this little boy on his birthday going out to the restaurant and not being able to eat the ice cream because of the blood on his spoon.
Caroline Young is a reporter at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. She too had been investigating the Creekmore case.
I would have horrible dreams, at first about child abuse and then sort of about the technicalities of the story. Then they just sort of dissolved into general, horrible, violent dreams that would wake me 3 or 4 times a night.
Young was confronted by a number of disturbing questions. Why had Eli been allowed to suffer for so long? Why were his grandmother and daycare teacher ignored? And why had CPS left the boy in the custody of his parents? Young requested an interview with the CPS caseworker. The request was denied. There would never be a public statement from the person who had direct responsibility for the case. State officials further insisted that by law, the details of the case were confidential.
The parents in the case still do have a right to privacy unless they waive it, and have a right not to have their files disclosed to the public. But for all the other families in the community who may be receiving CPS services now or who may receive those services in the future, I think that we certainly impair their confidence in the system and their confidence in feeling that if they do disclose personal information that it won't be talked about in the press. We impair that very severely if we talk about any particular case.
Hi, artist. This is Caroline Young at the PI.
But Young persisted. She learned that CPS had conducted its own internal investigation of the case and that the investigating team had included Randall Sparks, headquarters administrator for the state's Office of Children and Family Services. Sparks would become the spokesman for CPS.
Nearly every one of the indications of physical harm that Eli experienced were explained away as being accidental in nature. Mr. Creekmore knows how to give the kind of answers that people want to hear. They were all pretty well convinced that he was truly repentant. He would make serious efforts to work on controlling his anger and not lashing out at his child. He was abused as a child himself. He went into foster care. He went into group care. He went into Indian receiving homes. He was a product of the prison system. When you've been in and out of that many institutions, it's easy to see how you can become soured on authority or how to work around authority. And I think that he had many opportunities to do that, and he was very good at doing it.
He was a con artist. I told CPS, the caseworker, that he was a con artist and he would con anyone.
The grandmother's concern about Eli was perceived as I don't want to use the term interloper, but that was a description that was used, in that she did not like her son-in-law and did not approve of his influence in this family. And so therefore, because she allegedly didn't like him, she was trying to do these things to spite him, if you will.
All I could see was they were putting that child in a situation where he was going to be killed. And I told them that very same thing, and they would not listen.
The reports from Eli's grandmother and daycare teacher had been minimized or ignored, at least in part because CPS was legally obligated to give the Creekmores every opportunity to resolve their problems before permanently removing Eli from their custody.
We will do everything we can to reunify or keep families together. And at the other end of the pole, we have a situation where we also must do things to protect the child.
And our law, I think follows closely what the Constitution requires, that before you can permanently remove a child from the parent, that is, never send them home again, terminate the parent-child relationship, that you must make a showing that you've made every reasonable attempt to help the parents resolve their problem, that it's been unsuccessful, that it's not likely to be successful in the foreseeable future, and that it's in the child's best interest to have the rights terminated.
Obviously supposed to protect children from injury and harm and neglect. And on the other hand, they're supposed to mobilize the resources of society to keep troubled families together. And I'm sure almost every case they see, those two jobs they have are on a collision course.
As the evidence accumulated in the case, it should have been cause to more seriously question a case plan which allowed the child to stay in the home.
Caroline Young's first article would run on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after Eli Creekmore's death. Within hours after publication, the paper had received hundreds of phone calls.
People would say, well, I'll hold. And they'd hold for 20 minutes until my phone cleared. And then they would, get on the phone, and they would just be regular readers, and they'd get out the first sentence, I just read your story about Eli, and then they'd start to cry.
CPS is not being an advocate for anybody. You're right. But somebody has to be.
The details of the case provoked anger and outrage. At the Everett office of CPS, a crowd gathered to denounce the agency for failing to do its job.
And now Eli's dead, and there's nothing that anybody can do except for hope that other children will never have to go through what he did.
We're not dummies out here. We know what's going on, and I hope you don't let them forget this.
This is our state. We believe we make the laws. We can change them.
The state legislature was quick to respond. Hearings were called to investigate the case.
Can you categorically tell us that there was no report made to anybody in the Department of Social and Health Services that suggested that there was any continuing problem in the family home for this child upon his return to the family home?
There was judgment that the father was showing improvement in terms of his understanding of his behavior and control of his behavior. And based on that, the staff felt that they could not substantiate a continued removal of the child from the home.
The duty of the department is to look out for the interests of the child as the paramount obligation of the department. What intrigues me and what I ask you is, was there ever any question really in the mind of the department that that was in fact your mission?
When I met with with staffs involved in this, they continually pointed to what they regarded as a conflict in legislation. I've had personally received representations from members of the legislature that the department was in error in its interpretation of the law, and that we were harassing parents and removing people without reason.
If there is a great deal of pressure coming on the department from outside sources that feel that we're going to have to go to extremes to protect the parents' rights, let's hear about it, because we're out to protect the defenseless, and that happens to be the children.
CPS was under attack for maintaining the family at the expense of the child. But there were conflicting political pressures. Some felt that the concern for protecting children was a threat to the rights of parents and undermined the integrity of the family. Dr. William Backlund is head of a statewide organization called SOFT, Save Our Family Ties. SOFT is an active force in state politics.
We're working primarily on legislation to try to narrow the scope of CPS as opposed to the opposition, which is trying to broaden their scope and give them more work to do.
People forget the fact that one of the most important institutions in our country is the family. And your own RCW 1332 says that you're not to disrupt the family unless there's compelling evidence to do so.
I have some real doubts about the influence of some parental groups, whether it be the one that you're involved with, Dr. Backlund, or not, I don't know. But the simple fact of the matter is the department has been running so cautious about making sure they return a child to a home because of the parental pressures that have come from some organizations that forced the Creekmore child, Eli, to be put back in the home, and in fact they may actually share the burden and responsibility for that child's death.
Well, can I bother for a minute? All right, there's a bathroom in here?
Yes.
I don't know how clearly did I come across as far as, I guess I was kind of flabbergasted with Mike Kreidler with his accusation that parents' rights pressured the CPS worker. I don't...
Just unforgivable, and I apologize to you for him saying that. I think it was very bad.
I don't condone child abuse, but on the other hand, I see too many cases where kids and families get abused unnecessarily, at least from what I can see on the surface of the evidence, that there really is no substantial evidence, no physical evidence. In my case, there was no physical evidence. It was just purely the word of an anonymous phone call.
Most members of SOFT have personal complaints against CPS. In 1982, Bill Backlund and his wife Pat wanted to adopt a 10-year-old girl as a companion for their daughter. The girl, Pam, had been living with the family on a trial basis for almost 2 years. Before the adoption was finalized, the Backlunds were reported to CPS for allegedly bruising Pam in a spanking.
And so then they made a visit here, and unannounced, and came to my door and came in and began asking me a lot of questions about Pam's discipline and the fact that there had been a report made that Pam was being abused. And of course you can imagine my horror. I was completely shocked and frightened. Another point was made with my husband and I a week later, and at that appointment we submitted to them a short little booklet called Children, Fun, or Frenzy, which gives a scriptural understanding of corporal punishment, and tried to explain to them, our philosophy and that. And it was clear to us that the caseworkers would not accept this. And in fact, while we were talking to them, they were shaking their heads.
And so they came and they basically took her away and didn't tell us where she was going, and didn't tell us how long she'd be gone, didn't tell us what our rights were. Basically, the lady stood there at the door and told me that I had to find out those for myself, that she wouldn't tell me.
The Backlunds went to court and got the decision overturned. The adoption was allowed to proceed. But the Backlunds came away feeling CPS was a threat to the family.
The child really doesn't have any sense of security anymore. Even if they put him back in his home, he knows that they could come again in the future. And so there's a real undermining of authority of families, of parents, of the importance of the family. You see, because you're taking kids away from their family as if the family's not important. And when you go into a foster home or whatever else, there's not that sense of commitment and concern and love, like that underlying almost indescribable sense of of caring and concern that you have for your natural family.
The best foster family in the world is not as good as a marginal natural family. I've had kids that were taken away from home say, as happy as they've been at my house, still say, I wish I'd never said anything because I'd be at home. They've lost all of, not just their parents, but they've also lost grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors and the kids in the neighborhood that they grew up with. So they've lost a lot of things by moving around. They have to change schools. On the other hand, we see with other children that staying at home kills them or has them permanently injured. It's not infrequent to see a child taken away from home a couple of times because the parents, they got the help, but it didn't work. Eventually the child's put up for adoption, but by that time they're more damaged, harder to place. And adoption is a traumatic thing too, because especially, the older you are. So I think it really is an individual thing, and unfortunately only God knows which are the ones that are going to work well in one way or the other.
There is a need to protect children, but that in the vast majority of cases, kids want and need to be with their parents, and that by removing them from even an abusive or dangerous situation, you inflict some trauma on them. And that's what the law requires that you do, is balance those things out, that when you're going to protect the child, recognize that you're inflicting some harm by the mere act of removal, and balance that against the risk to the child.
But the assumption is if the child is in a family, a biological family, therefore it will be good for them. And that's not always the case. I think a better question is, what is in the best interest of this child? What's the best environment for this particular child to grow up in? And we all have a stake in children growing up in good, solid, physically and emotionally healthy environments so that they become productive, healthy, well-functioning citizens. We all have a stake in that. But that we don't always achieve that goal by working so hard to preserve the family. Some families are not worth preserving.
Lee Doran is a CPS caseworker in Seattle. Like the caseworker in the Creekmore case, he often has to decide when to intervene in the family and how best to protect the child.
Hi, Larissa, how you doing? It's just not that clear-cut, usually. And we just do the best we can, and it's hard to know whether you're doing the right thing for the child and the family. Has she started to sign by herself for what she wants?
Yeah, she's signing. She drink and eat and owie, and she's getting pretty good.
One of Doran's cases is a young mother who recently separated from an abusive husband. Her daughter, Melissa, had surgery to open a blocked nasal passage. Melissa must temporarily breathe through a plastic tube connected to a breathing machine. This requires round-the-clock supervision.
We were referred to her by the hospital, and they felt that she was overwhelmed, probably depressed, felt that there may be a risk of further complications if she wasn't able to adequately care for the little girl. So one of the services that we've provided is a nurse that we pay for to give her a break so that the family can stay together and the child can be safe and adequately cared for. So many aspects of what we do are controversial. If I leave the child in the home, I run the possibility of being wrong and having the child hurt again in the home.
Assessing the risk is often difficult, but in addition, Doran is expected to investigate an average of nearly 40 cases at a time.
It's impossible to do all of it well. We feel like we're, there's a real potential here for some child to turn up dead or seriously injured because we can't do it all. It's inevitable, unfortunately, that even with the best child protective services, even with the best laws, kids are going to continue to be at risk in their homes and are probably going to die. That doesn't mean that Eli's death was inevitable. It may not have been. But we can't guarantee that kids won't die in the future.
Six months after Eli Creekmore's death, his father went on trial for second-degree murder. The trial lasted 6 days. The key witness was Mary Creekmore, Eli's mother. She refused to be photographed in the courtroom.
Darren went to Eli's room.
Can you hear anything?
inside Eli's bedroom?
Yes.
What did you hear?
I heard a gasp and a thud.
Tell me what you mean by a gasp. Can you, if you can, just imitate that sound for me.
It was like...
What's the next thing that you can recall happening?
Eli came out of his room and told me that he pooped his pants. I started to take him to the bathroom to get him cleaned up. Darren turned around and asked Eli, "Why did you poop your pants, boy?"
What did he say?
"Because you kicked me in the stomach."
Mary went on to testify that after Eli's beating, she asked if she could take the boy to the hospital. Her husband refused, threatening her and saying that Eli would be all right. The jury was unanimous. Darren Creekmore was guilty. Before passing sentence, Judge Gerald Knight made these remarks. "We may not be able to prevent child abuse, but we have to try. A society that tolerates child abuse is a society doomed to extinction." Mary Creekmore pled guilty to failing to get help for her son. She was sentenced to 10 months in jail. Darren Creekmore was sentenced to 60 years in prison.
Myrna, come over here. Come over here.
Yes.
How do you feel, Myrna?
I feel relieved, especially that he's going to be put away where he belongs. I am really relieved.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
It appears to me that there was much stronger support for erring to protect the child rather than erring to protect the parent in the legislature than there is in the department. And I certainly do feel quite strongly that that needs to be clarified.
The Creekmore case would lead the state legislature to pass a sweeping package of reforms. Among them, a new law directing CPS to consider the safety of the child its highest priority. There would also be additional funding for child abuse prevention. Public health nurses would be paid to visit the parents of newborn babies. The nurses would offer emotional support and teach parenting skills, reducing the risk of abuse or neglect.
But teaching him the games like pat a cake are real good, especially the singing to him. Helps his language and it helps his coordination. Come on, Ray. There you go.
The state superintendent of schools announced that child abuse prevention would become a part of the high school curriculum. A model program at one school included an on-campus daycare center where students could learn how to better care for children.
A lot of them believe in hitting and slapping, and as we talk and work with it, I see them changing their values, and so I see some real behavioral changes happening.
She had given up, and that's why the father stepped in, and he physically abused the child.
CPS had made other internal changes as well. Any case where there was medical evidence of abuse and where the child was still in the home would be reviewed by a team of professionals from outside the agency. The goal, to be certain the child was safe.
My feeling is that I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to give them another chance.
But reducing the size of the caseload was a problem CPS could not solve on its own. Caseworkers called a noontime rally to express their frustration.
We cannot do adequate investigations. We cannot accomplish an adequate diagnosis and assessment. The turnover rate has continued to be exceptionally high, resulting in more inexperienced staff working under more dangerous and stressful conditions.
CPS would need 272 additional caseworkers statewide in the next 2 years. The cost, $14 million. The legislature decided it was just too expensive. They voted to compromise. Child Protective Services would get $5 million. The agency estimated that 40 additional caseworkers could be hired.
CPS will never be the same as a result of Eli Creekmore's death, that we can look to these changes that'll protect children, many children, I trust, in the future as a result of the experience that he went through.
I'm also hoping that people, out of their justified concern about protecting children, that they don't go too far on changing or amending our law. I think our law is generally pretty good, And I think it generally strikes a good balance between protecting the need to protect children and the need to protect the right of families and parents to be left alone.
There he is. That's a happy look. And there he is going down the slide. So tiny. Just so many things thinking about. You don't.
I like to remember that.
No matter how good a child protective services system is, that there will always, always be Eli Creekmores. It's the kind of situation where no matter how structured, how much you try to objectify the system, there are still subjective decisions that have to be made.
You've got to choose what kind of mistake you'd rather have them make. Would you rather have them split up families where they could be helped and kept together, or would you rather have some children that are seriously injured or die?
We want to protect children. On the other hand, as a society, we're very reluctant to intervene in the family, to make any changes. But we can't have it both ways. We cannot remain outside of the family and prevent children from being hurt in the way that this boy was. We can't have it both ways. In my opinion, it is not a private matter between only the parent and the child. It is important to all of us how that child is raised. This is tomorrow. This is our future.